What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you 5 games with satisfying endings, following yesterday's video of unsatisfying endings. But a couple of things right out of the gate here. For starters, the games I'm going to talk about have multiple endings, so we'll be talking about one very specifically, and naturally, as you might imagine, spoilers. I will throw a list of the games I'm going to be spoiling down in the description below if you want to take a look, and then I will likely also chapter the video as well, provided I remember to actually do it. And if you'd prefer the surprise of the list itself, just sit back and watch. First up on our list, we have Wasteland 3. Now, this is a game with many endings. However, we're talking about the ending that sees the Arizona Rangers take over Colorado peacefully. So the game itself, of course, centers around the Arizona Rangers heading up to Colorado in the post-apocalyptic wasteland that has become America, but we are there to help the Patriarch, as he's known, rein in his children in exchange for help in Arizona. However, through the events of the game, it is very possible that you will decide to overthrow the Patriarch, which usually leads to a battle of some sort. However, while it is quite difficult and requires several checks, if you will, and proceeding through the game in a very particular way, it is possible to gain enough support while carrying out your mission that you can peacefully overthrow the Patriarch, which is really the best ending. Now, there is some moral ambiguity to whether or not the Patriarch is a good person, especially in the post-apocalyptic wasteland here, as he's trying to give people mostly a normal life, but naturally has been using some questionable means. Moreover, there's the inevitable loss of life that a conflict between the Arizona Rangers and Colorado would bring, so it's a really satisfying conclusion to have managed to gather up all the support and make all the right decisions that allow you to take over Colorado from the Patriarch, get help back to Arizona where you need it, and it's really just the best outcome for everyone involved, and naturally is a very satisfying way to end that game. Next up on our list, we have Divinity Original Sin 2. Another game with many endings, but one in particular that I always found really satisfying was the one where you actually ascend to divinity. Now, I will tell you that the only outcome that is best for everyone involved is the Purged Source ending. However, that's good for everyone except you, the player, really. Whereas the ending that is satisfying to me personally, if admittedly a little selfish and not great for the rest of the world of Rivellon, is the Ascending to Divinity option, which sees you, the character, take the place of the divine, which is something you've been chasing down the entire game, the godlike power that is being the divine. And I don't think I really need to explain this one too much. At the end of the day, pretty much your goal the entire game. So getting there and then not choosing that, just in my opinion, felt a little wanting, for lack of a better word. Now, I think this is one people are likely to disagree with me on a little bit, but nonetheless, I found it very satisfying to actually just take up the mantle of the divine and end the journey that way, just because it's really cool. But admittedly, probably not the best ending. Third on our list, we have Planescape Torment. So, Planescape Torment is a game that is kind of renowned for its story, honestly. However, what always struck me the most about this game was the ending. So if you're unaware, there's technically a couple different endings to this game, which boils down to stuff like, do your companions live, that type of thing. However, the game itself ends more or less the same way, with the nameless one, your character, fighting in the Blood War. Now, I don't have all day to explain all the D&D references and nuance to this, but essentially, you see the nameless one condemned to hell for his past actions, which some people might look at and be like, well, that's not a great ending. You go through all this trouble and then your character is still doomed. However, if you're familiar with the story of Planescape Torment, a lot of it is about kind of introspection and asking yourself questions, and the journey the Nameless One has been on, which for starters has led him to seek immortality to have time to right the great wrongs that he's committed. However, this ultimately left him immortal, but every time he dies, he loses his memories. In some lives, he was even worse. In others, he was actually a pretty good person. So when you get a hold of the Nameless One, your journey is to essentially bring an end to this, more or less, in some way. So with that knowledge, and knowing full well that the Nameless One, perhaps even while you were playing as them, has done terrible, awful things to a great many people in an effort to shirk death, but in the end, it all finally catches up with you, and you're forced to make peace with who you are, what you've done, and accept that the only path to redemption for this character is their punishment to fight in the Blood War. I found it to be a really satisfying ending, and honestly, it's the type of ending that I think people could interpret many ways, but that's always how I looked at it, and I thought it was a satisfying end, even if it is a bit on the negative side. Number 4 on our list, we have Baldur's Gate 2, or more specifically, how Throne of Ball ends, which is an expansion of sorts. So, Baldur's Gate 2 ends in one of 3 ways. Either you ascend to godhood as the Lord of Murder, completing your journey, or you ascend to godhood, but instead of becoming an evil deity over murder, you overcome that and actually become a deity dedicated to balance and, good, as opposed to just straight up murder. And then there's the third option, staying mortal. And while D&D has technically established a canon choice for this story, most people find it kind of underwhelming. Now that said, I actually think all of these options are satisfying endings because they're an end to a journey that you've been on throughout Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. And honestly, this story felt so complete that a lot of people to this day are upset that they're trying to continue the Baldur's Gate series in some way with 3, which is understandable because, again, all of these endings, which are all pretty satisfying in their own way, felt like the end of the story. So in the Staying Mortal one, we see our character after this long battle against forces that had little to do with them, but rather their birth that they've been forced to deal with, finally have an option for peace. Whereas with both of the Ascension endings, either good or bad, we see our character in the same way. They finally complete their journey from being the child of a deity to actually being the deity itself. They managed to do what basically every other ball spawn could not, and that was mantle their father and become the new Lord of Murder, or whatever good deity they become if you went that route. All of which are, in my opinion, pretty great endings, admittedly for different reasons. If you've been running an evil playthrough and you finally manage to ascend to that powerful position of the Lord of Murder, good ending for you, maybe not the rest of the Sword Coast or Forgotten Realms. However, if you've spent your life trying to subvert people's expectations of you being a ball spawn, or at least if that's what you're role-playing it as, then the good Ascension option is very rewarding. Or if you just want to say no to all of this and then finally get to live out your life in peace, that's an option too. And again, I just found all of these a very satisfying conclusion to Baldur's Gate 2. And that, of course, brings us to the last game on the list, and that is the recent God of War. This is a game I reviewed relatively recently, actually, as I had finally gotten around to it, and as a father myself, rather unsurprisingly, the story resonated with me a great deal. Now, I honestly could see it not being everybody's cup of tea, but the story itself is essentially the journey that Kratos and Atreus are on to spread the ashes of a loved one, Kratos' wife and Atreus' mom. And naturally, it wouldn't be a game if they didn't come into a bunch of conflict, but the ending, of course, obviously setting up the next game that has yet to release, but is apparently still releasing this year. What it also does is bring a satisfying conclusion to the journey that these two were on, that saw them both kind of understanding each other, going from being rather standoffish to growing closer together while simultaneously laying a loved one to rest. And as someone who was really enjoying the story by that point, I thought the way they ended it, with you, of course, being able to complete that journey after seeing all of the build-up between the relationship between the two, them being able to complete this journey and fulfill the last wish of the deceased, was just a very satisfying ending, and I enjoyed it a great deal. There you guys go. There are 5 games with satisfying endings. Naturally, that is far from all of the great endings in video games, so if you have one that you particularly enjoy, I'd love to hear it down in the comment section below, which means, of course, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly just thank you. The channel is growing every day. I couldn't do that without you guys. And I love having these conversations about video games with you. So again, thank you. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.